Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Head to Head, a Star Wars show. So it looks like the High Republic and the Acolyte might actually be connected. That's right. The High Republic, which is already out, there's a couple of books out, few comics, it's really rolling along and people are starting to respond to it, might actually be connected to the upcoming series, Star Wars Acolyte. What does that mean for the Star Wars franchise? We're going to find out right now.
You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, yeah, it looks like now they're trying to connect the High Republic and the Acolyte. I mean, what's up with that?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's kind of been quietly talked about, but, now...
When? Because honestly, man, I don't remember this.
Well, yeah, it's kind of been one of those things that's kind of been a recent kind of development, or people kind of already kind of speculated that the Acolyte, where's it going to take place? And maybe everyone's always said it's going to take place pretty much at the tail end of the High Republic. So it makes sense that they're kind of connected in a way.
All right, well, I mean, we basically have, some of the information. I know you got a video that you've been watching, and I got to see a little bit of it, read an article. So, let's get into it. All right, so with the High Republic, we know that we already have 2 novels out that are out right now. And then we have... we're about to have like issue 4 or something of the comic series.
Mm-hmm.
And the Acolyte, on the other hand, is supposed to be released when? I'm trying to remember the timeline of that.
As far as that, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think they really gave us a time.
I mean, they announced it, but they didn't really give us like some sort of definitive time. Like, oh, yeah, the Acolyte's going to be out, whatever. They just said, yeah, it's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, much like the Acolyte, it's kind of a mystery, so...
Yeah, I mean, what do we know about the Acolyte so far?
Well, it's directed by Heather Headland. That's going to be she's Leslie Headland. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's it.
So she's going to be one at the helm of the show. Apparently, it's kind of have a bit of like a Dr. Aphra kind of vibe from what I've been hearing.
Right, that's the one. It's funny because they announced all these series, and I was actually having a hard time remembering which one of these series. I mean, there's just so many of them that it's really hard to keep track of all of them sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, this one is supposed to be female-centric as well. I think there's a female lead on this particular series. So, but it kind of has that Dr. Aphra vibe where she's kind of like this, I guess, forest relic anthropologist, if you will, I guess, going to find all these different artifacts or what have you, trying to, I guess, glean more knowledge of the dark side. And along that path, she might eventually herself turn into either a dark side just user, or she may actually become a Sith. We don't know.
Yeah, that was the thing that I was thinking about, too, is the fact that I do remember that it had something to do with the dark side, that they were going to explore that a little bit more. But I think what I'm really fascinated by in this whole thing is... how is that going to connect to the High Republic? Now, I know that you actually were, you brought this article to me, that basically it was basically the guy that wrote the comic, right?
He wrote the long day.
Hey man, I know. Well, at least you're not having to write anything, right? I mean, at least this isn't a blog. It's like a video, so you're good.
Well, at least I would have spell check. But no, yeah. So he's written a lot of the different comics, and he's written some stuff for Marvel. He's done things. It's definitely in the Star Wars universe with the High Republic. He's kind of one of the main feature guys that we talked about when it's first kind of broke about who the writers were going to be, and of course Claudia Gray being one of them as well. And so he's a part of this kind of 5-person collective of writers. His name is Cavan Scott. And so Cavan is from England. He's written the first couple of the comics that we are kind of, been exposed to thus far. And he's pretty much just given us a whole synopsis, which is really fascinating and really interesting, just how he understands Star Wars.
I was thinking the exact
You know?
same thing. I mean, when I was watching this, it was just uncanny because here's a guy who's responsible for writing some of the new franchise stuff now. We're moving past the Skywalker saga. We're going into some new territory. Granted, it's a new era. It's going back in time. It's 200 years before the Phantom Menace. But what I really loved about the way that he talked, he reminded me of Dave Filoni.
Yeah, I was about to say, he definitely gives you the Filoni vibes. And the really cool thing about him is that it seems like he really understands what Star Wars is really about. And with his background in being in theology, it's kind of much reminiscent a lot of George Lucas in a way too, when it comes to writing these stories, because that's the other thing too. We've often said that, Star Wars was birthed and created out of the mind of George Lucas, who pulled from a lot of different Western philosophies, Eastern philosophies, a lot of the typical story beats that the hero's journey, the samurai stuff, some Western things. So he kind of brings all that to Star Wars. And so now when you have people writing new stories in the franchise, telling the story of Star Wars prior to George Lucas's version, you kind of almost have to wonder, like, okay, well, how do you do that? Because George Lucas started it here, Phantom Menace, let's just say. And he goes from Phantom Menace all the way through, Return of the Jedi. Now you can kind of say, okay, well, with the sequels, you can just kind of pick up from what George Lucas already started.
Yeah.
But to go before he started with his own front, you see what I'm saying? Like that.
Yeah, I know. It is a little bit different.
Daunting.
And it's also good that there are other people, because up until now we thought that Dave Filoni was sort of like the only type.
Yeah, that was
like
around.
He's kind of the keeper of basically he's the one. Yeah, he's the one that studied under Lucas. He's the one that I would say understands the best. But watching his Cavan Scott.
Yep, Kevin.
Okay, I actually tagged him in Twitter on the show.
Sweet.
So if he ended up at all like watching this, I really don't want to butcher the gentleman's name, but he's very eloquent.
Mm-hmm.
He gave a fantastic interview, I thought.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
I mean, it was just so amazing. And to just see somebody who really, like I said, this guy really understands the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
Pretty much, if not as well as Filoni, very close.
Very close, too. Yeah, I mean, he made a lot of good things. He answered a lot of questions that you and I have discussed even on this show.
Right.
Especially a lot of things dealing with the Force, a lot of things dealing with the philosophy of the Jedi as far as like where they're going. Yoda, there's a lot of questions we had about once we realized Yoda was still going to be in the High Republic. Okay, well, what are they going to do with him? How, what's his position? Why is he taking, this lesser role? Because he's not the head of the council at this time. Why? You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of different things that he kind of definitely sheds some light without spoiling anything. And that's what I really loved, because once again, him being the creator that he is, he was able to give that stuff to us where it definitely satisfies you as far as your craving for understanding the High Republic and what's really going on, and how do you advance Star Wars in a way that's true, once again, like you talked about last week, that's true to Star Wars. It has to feel like Star Wars. And just as an example, he made mention of the dark side of the Force. And at this time period, like you said, this is 200 years before the Phantom Menace. And so you don't have any Sith Lords running around. So what's going to be the threat to the Jedi at this point? Because that's what we've always known is, okay, there's some sort of Sith Lord that's lurking around, and, they're going to spring up eventually and cause a bunch of havoc. Well, at this point, he even sets the world up for us. The High Republic is kind of a time of peace, and he really wants to emphasize that the Jedi are more like police officers. They're not military like they were in the Clone Wars, where you're calling them General Skywalker and General this and, Commander that. And, now they're just, master and apprentice, and they're more like police officers, which was their original intent. So he even brought up to the fact that Coruscant didn't happen until later, because at this point, they had Jedi outposts on any large planets that had a lot of people around. Jedi had an outpost there, and they were a part of the community. They would walk down the street and like, hey, man, Master so-and-so. And it's like, hey, good morning. Is that type of like,
exactly.
almost like Pleasantville or something.
Right. And it was almost like you said, like that neighborhood police officer vibe.
Right.
People kind of, he
like
did
Andy
also
Griffin
mention,
or something like that. That's kind of the vibe you get.
And he also mentioned the fact that, it was kind of like, it was one of those things that you weren't quite at the point yet where the Jedi were so, I guess, I don't know, fierce or whatever, to where you knew that, like, okay, these guys are drawing their lightsabers or whatever.
Yeah, they're at this point now where, if you draw the lightsaber or, people weren't challenging Jedi at this point.
Right.
They were still like, it was a whole lot of respect.
Yeah, there was respect. There was, it just wasn't the same kind of vibe.
Right.
There wasn't that real, like, I don't know, almost like fear or something.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think what kind of made that happen is once you moved into Coruscant, where you kind of have this whole temple, and they're kind of contained in this one building, you don't see them just out mingling with everybody. People are going to draw their own speculation of what and who the Jedi are.
Oh, absolutely.
And so now it goes from Pleasantville or the Andy Griffin Show, where everybody kind of knows, the resident police officer and, by name. And now it's kind of like, well, these guys just showed up and we know about them. We know what they do, but it's like, it's kind of that mystery there.
Yeah, and I mean, what's cool about it too, and this is one of the things that fascinated me actually, was the fact that they have, it's like a base or something, or an outpost on the Outer Rim, which I thought was really kind of cool, because that could give us all kinds of stories, and it could begin to fill in some of the gaps of our knowledge about the Outer Rim, maybe even the unknown regions. Of course, the Thrawn series is already doing that for us as well.
Sure.
So there's just like all kinds of tie-in, I think, that they can do. And I mean, you even had said at some point in one of our shows that, people tend to, the people that are reading the novels right now tend to gravitate toward that, I want the universe filled in for me, where the people that are only going to see the movies or whatever, and that's not necessarily to say they're only casual fans, because there's some people that are, they're only interested in the movies, but I mean, they're really hardcore about it though.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I mean, that those of us like myself who actually like to really see the full picture of this universe because we love it so much, I just think it's one of those things that you could do to where you can use the High Republic now to start to fill in the gaps of knowledge for things like the Outer Rim, the unknown region. Maybe the Hutts were actually mentioned in this article too, that you get to see a little bit about. They're not quite the criminal empire that they were, where they're just sort of like in the Outer Rim and they're just kind of doing whatever. I mean, they're a little bit more prominent during the time of the High Republic.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they even have their own space. It's almost kind of like the Klingons in a way. That's kind of what I got, the vibe I got from it.
We are so good at throwing in all these Star Trek references. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I know. I mean, but that's the thing, though. I mean, there's a lot of different similarities to both franchises, honestly. I mean, and there's some complete stark differences, too. But one of the things is that with the High Republic, I really enjoy is that you're seeing what the Jedi were like before, and you're seeing how, they got to this point of, because, when we first, see A New Hope, we didn't know what the heck a Jedi was, so it was just like, you're finding it out through the eyes of, or through the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was like, well, Jedis were the keeper of the peace, and, they were, just for over a millennia, they've been guardians and kind of keeping things in order and things like that. So you're like, okay, well, cool. And, he even explains what the Force is. Like, the Force is an energy field that penetrates and lives in all living
Well,
things.
and again, as well as anybody, that I really go for that simplistic explanation.
And
I like
Cavan
the
Scott
macro.
Yeah. And Cavan Scott completely agrees with that. He said that's the best explanation.
Right, that's the best explanation, and it is. And my biggest issue, and I've said this on, it's interesting that Jason is back with us tonight, because he's always been a really big part of our discussions about the Force in general, and I mean, like a nearly 4-hour show or something once when we just focused on it. But one of the things that I really like about Cavan's whole thing and what he supports is the fact that it should just be this more macro explanation. You know, when people try to get like a little bit too deep, I almost feel like, and this is where it gets sci-fi to me almost, and I've said this before a million times too, is that when people start to try to explain the Force too much, it does 2 or 3 things. One, it demystifies it. It basically takes away any of the mystery and the mystique.
Right.
And it forces you to actually go into directions that you wouldn't normally have to go in, which brings me to number 2, and that is now you start to paint yourself in corners because you're actually putting all these rules or limitations or whatever it is when you try to explain something too much. And now you're in this endless cycle of having to almost justify your storylines in a way, depending on the usage of the Force. And that could be a very dangerous proposition, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, when you really look at the Force, and once again, this is, you know, something George Lucas has always kind of brought up anyways, that, you know, it's kind of like a religion. It's kind of have, you know, for those people who believe in a God or something like that, that's pretty much what the Force is like this unseeable energy that's around. And, you know, some people, you know, find, you know, a connection. A lot of people nowadays are into crystals, and some people are into, you know, people feel vibes and energy and things of that nature. And so what the Force is, and it's one thing I really love that, you know, Scott said, was that when you look at the Force, like different people have their own interpretations of it. And that's so cool to me, because one person can look at it from, like they said, I think it was Ava Crease. She kind of hears it like in the musical kind of form, where she can kind of interpret it like almost music, or looks into the Force as music in a way to her. Where then somebody else might look at it in a completely different way, where it's more like,
well, and that's it.
You know, and that's what I'm saying.
They're starting to really expand. But what I love about this, and this is the thing that to me anyway is the key, they're giving you a little bit more variety as far as the use of the Force, how people respond to it, how the Jedi are using it, but they're doing it without explaining it too much.
Exactly. And that's what Jason was actually saying. Jason, he says, the more you explain or analyze the Force or any magic system, the less it becomes magic and the more it becomes science. Right. You know?
That's been our... pretty much our whole thing, and that's been what I've been saying, is that you're moving out of the realm of fantasy and more into sci-fi.
Right.
And the thing about Star Wars, and we addressed this last week a little bit when we were talking about, well, you know, how do you go beyond, how do you expand the whole Star Wars universe, the storylines, even the parameters a little bit, but stay within the boundaries of what makes it Star Wars? And we could probably do like 3 or 4 shows on what makes Star Wars Star Wars.
Sure.
But at the same time, you know, I think that one of the things that you have to do is you have to stay within, it's almost like you have to basically stay right within that fine line of sci-fi fantasy. You could probably actually err more toward fantasy if you wanted to, because that's really what I think that
Star Wars.
It's not a fantasy sci-fi; it's a sci-fi sci-fi fantasy.
Right? No, you're completely correct. The thing about Star Wars is that it's kind of centered around the Force, you know, and that's really the driving point, or one of the driving mechanisms of Star Wars is the Force, you know, and you constantly keep learning more and more about it. The thing I love about that Cavan is really doing, and it seems like the other writers are doing as well, is that they're taking things from the original trilogy and just expounding upon it. So conversations that Obi-Wan has said, or things that, you know, Yoda has brought up, you know, when he's talked about, you know, the Force is in the trees, the rocks, like it's in everything. And so now it's like, okay, well, now we talked about those creatures, the Dringir, you know, and now they're like basically like these plant like or locust type things that kind of devour plants.
Those things are freaky.
And they're freaky, yeah.
And, you know, we covered that we did this whole series, and it's ongoing. We're reviewing every issue of the High Republic comic series. So 1 through 3 are on our site, on
Yeah.
our channel right now.
Check
So
those
yeah,
out.
you guys, that's a little bit of a plug. You can check that out. But yeah, we ended that where, Skier was actually kind of taken over by
One of those.
one of them or whatever. But I mean, they're kind of freaky. And what I liked about what Cavan said about that was that he went into how he got the idea from the whole cave scene on
Right.
Dagobah,
Right.
and pretty much like, hey, there's all these like, the force flowing through nature and stuff like that. But a lot of times when we see depictions of that, it's all this light side stuff. Well, surely the dark side flows through some of this stuff as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's hence the cave.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's what
I
I'm
mean,
saying.
it's
Like,
full
there's
of
a
all this
whole-
living, I mean, to me, that was actually one of the most freaky scenes in the whole saga.
Oh yeah, like when Luke,
When Luke went down in that cave,
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, I was only like 10 years old or something. I remember just going like, whoa, man.
Well, first I was freaked out because I was like, how the heck did Vader get there, and how did he know that, and how did he bypass Yoda and everybody, and then like they had the whole duel, and then of course Luke lops the head off, and then it pops open, and it's
Yeah, I mean, all the symbolism and imagery of that
yeah.
that whole scene was fantastic. But I remember that first scene, though, when Luke, like, kind of goes down into the cave, he's dug. I mean,
yeah,
first of all, there's, like, no way on the planet Earth or Dagobah or whatever that I would even ever go down there.
right.
And, Yoda's all, well, you don't need those weapons. You only need what, you take with you. I'm like, well, I want to
Everything.
get the X-Wing down in there. I want to lower, like, R2 down there. I want...
Yoda, you're coming too.
Yeah, Yoda, you're going to come down here. I mean, it's just one of those things where I would
group
want to be...
project.
Yes, I would want to be very well armed if I were going down there, because it just seems like it was one of the freakiest, scariest places ever.
Yeah, and even listening to Luke's like watching his face, and he's like, I feel cold, and he's like, oh, and so it's just all of those different things is just really, really, really cool. And I love the way that, like I said, Cavan Scott and the rest of the writers tend to expound upon that, because they're taking things that we already are familiar with the original trilogy, and they're just taking, and they're just, like you said, just keep growing or make it on a macro level, to the point where it's like, okay, now we can explore this stuff for real in a different way, without contradicting, without going against, without completely abandoning the whole Star Wars formula, if you will.
Well, and that's what's really important too, like I said, because you have to keep the formula in mind.
Mm-hmm.
One of the mistakes I think that was made in the sequel trilogy was they didn't, first of all, not having a plan, which is where I think that the High Republic writers, clearly they sat in a room, they came up with a story arc, they kind of divided it up between the books and the comics, and they said, okay, here's our plan, now let's go execute the plan. That was the first mistake, and I've said this a billion times actually on this show. But where it shows is that they were trying to expand Star Wars just for the sake of expanding it. But then they would always back up. So
Without rhyme or reason, for a lot of times.
yeah, I mean, exactly. What
Yep.
they would do is they would just, it made sense for what they did in The Force Awakens. I mean, I know it gets a lot of criticism sometimes, but I actually support what they did in The Force Awakens.
All right.
They basically, they keep saying, oh, you retold episode 4. No, they didn't really retell episode 4. It's kind of like rhyme. It's kind of like poetry. It's
Familiar, but not
it's
the same.
familiar, but not the same. It's a storytelling device. If you know anything about storytelling, then that's basically what they were doing. Now, we could debate, and again, this is totally up for debate. Even though the actual technique and device they were using was sound, and it's not what people thought it was, you can debate whether or not they were successful in that. In that maybe they did retread the story a little too much, or maybe they did do a few things wrong. But either way, one of the things that I love about this whole High Republic thing is that they're doing it correctly. Now, here's something that I want to put back to you now, especially because even though I did watch the interview, I read the article, you're kind of like you're the keeper of the, like you're kind of like the oracle here with all this stuff that we look at. How do you think this is going to tie into the Acolyte? Because this is pretty much what this show was about, where I thought wisely this is great, because we could have talked about the High Republic and just left it at that, honestly. There's a lot to go into. even with this interview, because what's fascinating to me is I went into this interview and I was actually thinking like, okay, this guy's going to tell us all about how it ties in with the Acolyte and on it goes. He's not really doing that. I mean, a lot of it was him going into the High Republic and how they're handling the characters, how they're handling the Force, and all kinds of stuff. And he did go into it a little bit.
Right.
But that begs the question. How do you think that they're going to tie into the High Republic or to the Acolyte with this?
Well, I think that, with the onset of different things, you have these pirates denial, you have these, different creatures or things, and I'm sure there's going to be some other things that are going to pop up, surely.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Yeah, that's going to have, and he even mentioned, like, it's going to be some more stuff that's, that's going to give the Jedi, a run for their money for some things. And I think that's where you're starting to see, and I could see how that can work, because up until a certain point, like I said before, this whole period of time, the Jedi have kind of been able to kind of do things their way. It's kind of always been, all right, we're the keepers of the peace. Everybody just respect us. You see us, you see the lightsaber come out, go in your home. And everybody just kind of like, all right, no questions about it. And no one.
That's right. It's been Jedi business. Go back to your drinks.
Exactly. So like no one is really, standing up to the Jedi because they're so feared. But I think what's going to happen eventually is something's going to happen in this particular series where people are going to realize that there's a counter to the Jedi, and that being the dark side. And because, like I said, we haven't seen any Sith for like millennia, okay, no one is even aware that there's even a dark side. You just know about the light. So something is going to probably be unearthed, or someone's going to stumble upon something. It could be one of these Dringir. I mean, like if someone they're getting possessed by, the Dringir, and they're reeking with the dark side. Well, now wouldn't that kind of glean to the fact that like, okay, well, now this particular person that the Dringir may have embodied, or maybe have implanted something or possessed or whatever this thing is going to do.
Right.
Now this thing has dark side abilities, which means that they have the Force, but they're using it from the dark side perspective. Now you might find, okay, then the Acolyte, this person like, okay, well, I want to find this power. I want to have power too. So now I'm going to try to find these relics or things that, I've heard about or read about, in these particular battles or situations that may have happened, or in these different places that may have existed. Let me go researching and see if I can find something that would give me that power too.
And I was going to say, you have to start this discussion by going over what we know so far about the Acolyte.
Right.
What we know about the Acolyte is that it's going to be a Dr. Aphra-like feeling series, where if you guys don't know who Dr. Aphra is, if there's anybody out there, she's basically a character that was created as kind of like the Star Wars equivalent of Indiana Jones. But essentially, I think it's going to start, if you have this person or whatever it is that's kind of an acolyte, which as we know is more of a Sith type apprentice, that is going out there and looking for, like you said, artifacts or, magical whatever properties or something. Maybe they unearth something, but I actually agree with your assessment in the sense of, I think the Dringir are definitely going to be the key to this whole thing. And that's what's really going to start to tie the High Republic and the Acolyte together. Now, what remains to be seen, though, is how they introduce this.
Right.
And exactly how much does it overlap? Because as you and I have talked about a million times, they're really starting to play a little bit with the eras in Star Wars. They're kind of going, they're not going in a linear fashion like they were. First we had the original trilogy, which is basically the middle. Then they're like, okay, well, let's go back and tell that story, and now let's go forward and tell that story. And pretty much everything was sort of happening within the nucleus of that saga. But now you have The Mandalorian, which is coming out, and you have a couple of series that are going to stick a little bit to that post-Return of the Jedi era.
Like Ahsoka.
Yeah,
you
Ahsoka,
know,
Rangers
which
of the
is
New Republic, stuff like that.
Right.
But then you got like Rogue One that not Rogue One, Rogue Squadron, which I think they said that was going to take place like after Rise of Skywalker.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're going after the sequel trilogy. Then you get the High Republic. The High Republic is going like 200 years before the Phantom Menace.
Right.
If they're tying the High Republic into the Acolyte, you got to think that the Acolyte's going to take place around this era then.
Yeah, definitely.
Of the High Republic.
Definitely. Oh, yeah, it's definitely going to take place around there. And the question is, like, now, because even looking at the comics and the books that they have, right? So you and I have often noticed that, they'll jump around and even, with the book, like the book kind of fills in stuff that the comic doesn't fully explain. So like Skier's arm and everything like that, like, okay, that's fully explained in the book, but you kind of just, when we first meet Skier, it's already lopped off. And, so I think, and he said that this is kind of like the way that they're going to do things, where things are going to be kind of coming in and out and weaving their stories, which is really cool because, and this is why they really had to plan, going back to your point earlier, this is why they really had to plan this particular series, because you have people who are going to be doing things in the same timeline, but every author kind of has their own different kind of zone, I guess, if you will. So you might have Cavan Scott, who's got like Skier and Ava Chris over here, but then you might have someone else who got like Great Storm. I think that's his name, Great Storm. You got him over here and Yoda's over here. And I was like, okay, well, in my story, I'm having Yoda do this. It's like, well, no, wait, you can't do that because I'm using him. And this is prior to what you're doing. So you can't use them. So now they have to figure out ways around that. And you see what I'm saying? And that's what's really cool about it, because they already know how the High Republic is going to end. They already know that already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now they're just trying to figure out, like, okay, now how do we tell their stories?
Right. It's the George Lucas problem.
Right. And how do we tell our stories? But they talk every day. And that's one of the things that he talked about.
Well, that is kind of nice.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I really love the way that they're handling it. They're doing it very intelligently. And they're all, phenomenal writers.
Well, I'll put forth even a slightly different theory of what happened and why Star Wars went wrong. And a lot of people are blaming the whole Disney connection. But the actual fact of the matter is, and don't get me wrong, I mean, that's definitely a big part of it. But what people aren't looking at is the fact it's not so much that the Kathleen Kennedy or the story group or whatever just have no clue. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have a problem if people made the argument. But where the problem comes in, where I think it's the biggest issue, is that you're going from it all coming from the mind of one guy,
right,
to now you have a committee.
Mm-hmm.
And because you have this whole committee, things are bound to happen. And even in the expanded universe, which is now Legends, George Lucas had to actually step in a lot of times and say, you know what, no, you can't do that with Yoda, or you can't do that, because either he actually had plans, as he knew he was making the prequels and everything, so he didn't want anything in the expanded universe to necessarily, even though he did look at it as like a separate kind of deal. So, I mean, it's kind of like if they do something in the expanded universe, it doesn't necessarily affect canon. But that said, he still didn't want them to go off and do something crazy and confuse the fan base, because there were a number of people that were reading these books. And when Lucasfilm started doing the whole publishing thing and doing these novels, I mean, George Lucas didn't think anything of it because he didn't think it was going to be that successful. So I think he was even a little bit taken aback by it. Yeah, he was caught off guard by it. So consequently now, you have a group of people who are actually doing the story thing correctly. Because it's like you said, you have to. If you got a number of people that are writing all these different stories, and especially if they start hopping around chronology, even within the High Republic, you have to carefully, because they do have the story already set. They know how it's going to end. They know all that stuff. But it's all the stuff they got to fill in.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, yeah, even with certain characters, like, so in particularly, they spoke about Yoda, right? So when we first heard about the High Republic, Yoda was one of the first, images we saw. And we're like, oh, okay, young Yoda. That's what we always called him, even though he's still probably like 600 years old or something like that. But, the thing is that even with a character like Yoda, you have to be, and they've said it, you have to be very, very, very careful with him because on how you utilize him. They talked about even the philosophy of the Jedi, and that's what I'm really interested in too. That's the kind of the other kind of the sub stories that I see that's going to come out of this is their interpretation of the Force, because when you don't have opposition, you can remain constant. It's then now when there's chaos, everybody has an opinion on what they want to do with it. So just think about it. You have a room full of people. We're all friends. And then, something like a fire breaks out. Well, one person wants to go at the fire extinguisher. The other one person says we should leave the building. Other one person wants to call, 911. The other person wants to, let's try to smother it. Well, everybody's got a different view on the same threat. And so that's what I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with the Jedi, because we have people like Skier who may be a little bit more aggressive, as we've seen. But then you see others who may, like Yoda, who's a little bit more passive. He's a little bit more calm. He's a little bit more thought-provoking and wants to kind of figure out, like, okay, well, let's look at this situation objectively.
Right.
So I can see where this whole rise in the dark side, not necessarily from a Sith, but just in the sense of you have this dark side energy that's coming out between the Nile and the Drengir, and who knows whatever else is lurking out there that might pop up. How is that going to affect the Jedi? And is there going to be a lot of infighting amongst the Jedi? Because now everybody's going to have an opinion on the same threat. Well, what should we do about this? And is Yoda going to have to step in and say, well, look, as senior member, I think I've been around a while. I'm more talented than, does he have to pull rank? Or, I'm just curious about that.
It's going to be really strange because I don't think it's an accident that they're putting in there all this stuff about the different approaches at each of these Jedi. And that's not even including their Padawans.
Exactly.
They've sort of focused a little bit on the Padawans, like on a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I mean, you and I are sort of at a disadvantage. I've only started reading Light of the Jedi, which is the first of the High Republic novels. We're right there with the comics, but the comics has really been the only window into the world that you and I have consistently been able to get through.
Right.
So I'm starting to read the stuff, but it's a little strange though, because one of the things that just from reading, all these different elements, right? Mm-hmm. You basically have the 2 novels that have been released. You have the 3 comics that are out, but they're releasing little bits of information. They've had like these little animated short things or something, like these illustrations that they've released on YouTube or whatever. And you're getting more of these nuggets that are coming out, more information. And one of the things that you're seeing is that each of these Jedi have distinct approaches to how they use the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And consequently, when you use the whole fire example, once they are actually confronted by somebody, either the dark side itself, or maybe it's a Drengir, maybe it's a dark side working through some of these other non-Force using groups, it's going to be really interesting to see, like you said, if there is infighting. Mm-hmm. Because everybody's going to have you're seeing a little bit of that even now with just the comics, that everybody's got a different view. You know what I mean? It's kind of like they're sort of debating.
Well, you look at that Skier, like, he's kind of shown himself to be a little shady.
Oh, yeah.
So, and, he's a Jedi Master. So you're kind of like, okay, well, if he's like that, then...
Well, obviously, one of the things that we look at, and you mentioned this earlier tonight, is the fact that there's a reason why Yoda not only became essentially the head of the council, but his philosophy of the Force became the one that was just this is kind of like the philosophy we're going to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And it stands to reason anyway, because one of the things I like about the High Republic, especially what they've done with Yoda, they're establishing right away that Yoda is decided to kind of get out of the battles and get out of all the, the police work, I guess you could say, of the Jedi. And he's going into teaching.
Yeah, he's like the training academy.
Yeah, he's like the training academy. And I think that's they're trying to set that up. They're trying to go, listen, Yoda now is establishing himself as kind of like the teacher of the Jedi at this point. So he's going to start to instill his philosophies, his version of the Force that's going to start to culminate into what more and more people are starting to think about when they think about the Force and so on. And it's going to establish him as the guy that's almost like the academic. You know what I mean? It's kind of like they're really setting up what we're seeing later on by the time the Phantom Menace hits.
Well, the thing about Yoda is the cool thing about him is that because he's been around so long and he's studied so much, he's had more time to study than anyone, so it's like, okay, even though they might have like all the same books, he's had more time to read them.
Sure.
And then he's had his own experiences and things.
Probably written a few of them.
Exactly. So, but one of the things I want to get to is, the chat. So Ronaldo,
oh man, yeah, I'm sure people have probably chatted because we've been talking a while since we put up Jason's last chat.
Yeah, so let me get to some of these.
Yeah, let's get to the chats.
Let's see.
After all, that's why we're here. We're here for you guys. We want to discuss it. He and I could talk about Star Wars anytime.
Yeah, and we do.
And we do.
Jason says, from what I've heard, the main character of the Acolyte could be a Sith apprentice from the Rule of Two era, which is an idea that I love.
Yeah, that could actually be something that would really be. I'm really curious on what they're going to do with this whole thing, with the Acolyte, with the Sith.
Yeah.
I mean, it just...
I don't think the Sith are going to necessarily come back at this point. I think they're still waiting on... Because I think that, once again, that would contradict Phantom Menace.
Yes and no. What if... Because remember, it's Yoda and all his people, like 200 years. That's a couple of generations.
Right.
Well, depending on the species.
Right.
So, what if the Jedi that were facing the Sith, like, they weren't necessarily coming into contact with them? Because, like you said, I mean, they got these Jedi outposts everywhere. Now, granted, news would travel fast, I would assume, but
yeah, you're definitely
we don't know.
You're definitely gonna let okay, if I'm a Jedi and I spot a Sith Lord, like, yeah, you got to let that be known to everybody.
Well, but if it's kind of like a one-off, well, you could say the same thing about Maul, I guess, but let me put it like this. It may not be as weird to see a Sith now as it would be then. Sure, it's almost like, well, the Sith have been extinct for a millennia or something like that. So that's way before. That's more like Old Republic times.
Exactly. See, that's why I think the Acolyte comes into play. Because I think the Acolyte, when you have that person is kind of like a Padawan of a Sith Lord. So if you have someone who's trying to study and kind of like, I can see that, somebody, like you said, a non-force using person decides, and we've seen this even in like Marvel or other superhero comics, where you got regular day people who want superpowers because, they don't want the real superheroes to kind of have all the power or, the fame and glory and all that type of stuff. Almost kind of like Michael Keaton's character in Spider-Man. But I can see that if you got a normal person who's like, okay, well, if this stuff happened, I wonder if I can, obtain this power too. And they end up, because they're going for selfish reasons, they're not going to actually help. That's, once again, feeds into the dark side.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to say.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Is the whole reason why I think this whole Acolyte thing and why it's called the Acolyte and why is it dark side heavy? One, because it's cool. We haven't seen that before.
Right.
So the producers are probably like going, what have we not seen before in Star Wars? Well, you know what? We've never actually seen a show or anything focused on a dark side user. I mean, how cool is that, right?
Exactly.
But I think more in universe and more along the lines of the story, I think one of the main reasons why they might have gone in this direction is for that reason. Because if you're like a normal person and you're just trying to get, the Force, and why should these guys have all these powers? You're kind of, it's kind of like you're putting yourself on the path of the dark side right away. It's more of a selfish reason. It's more of, jealousy, I'm doing this. Yeah, I'm doing this for me. Why should they have it and I don't? Basically, like you said, a jealousy kind of thing.
Or maybe it could be one of those Palpatine type situations where maybe a person heard that, with these Sith powers, you can actually heal some. Maybe somebody could be trying to do something for a noble cause, like, oh, I want to save my daughter who might be near death or something like that, and I need to find these relics. And then they end up, screwing themselves over and kind of going to the dark side.
I just can't wait till we get more information about that.
Definitely. Jason also says, I hope the Acolyte loosely ties into the High Republic plot and or explain what the Sith are doing at that time.
Yeah. That's going to be the trick, mostly because of what you basically just said. Mm-hmm. And that is, how are you going to tie in the Sith without nuking out everything that was said in the Phantom Menace?
And that's why I don't think it's going to be the Sith. I think it's going to just be a strong dark side user, almost like an Asajj Ventress type person, where you're not a Sith Lord, but you're doing enough that you're formidable.
Well, and how about this? It could even, because you also have the Dathomir witches, you have a bunch of other Force, dark side Force users, and sure. I would probably agree that that's probably going to be the case, because let's face it, as soon as you go into the whole Sith thing, now you're going into the same problems that you would have had before, that they were painting themselves into all these corners. And being that they've handled this so well, being that everything has been done, at least up until this point, look, I know it's early, guys. I get it. It's kind of like, okay, let's not pop the champagne corks after like 2 novels and 3 comics or something. But, hey, they could have done a lot of damage in that.
Sure. Mother Vansel, she's here with us, and she says, hi, guys. We've got our usual suspects. Ronaldo, what's going on, man?
Hey, Ronaldo. We were wondering where you were.
I know.
He's late. We're gonna have to give you like a tardy slip or something for this.
And then, of course, we know Jason is here. Ronaldo also asked the question, or not asked the question, but he says, we know that the protagonist of the Acolyte is a female character. So, would you like it to be a character from the High Republic or a known one from Legends?
I was going to say, my initial response to that would have been, I really kind of wish that they would have just done a Dr. Aphra series. I kind of wish that maybe they would have gone in that direction. Now, if they're not going to give us Dr. Aphra herself, who kind of fits that bill, by the way. She's sort of kind of dark side-ish. She's like one of those people that she's definitely kind of on the shady side.
Right.
I have a feeling that what's going to happen, and again, this is just my opinion, guys. I think that what's going to happen is that they are going to introduce the main character of the Acolyte in the High Republic somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to come back like maybe towards the tail end of it. Ronaldo says, I don't know why, but I think they may use Darth Talon.
Well, Talon would be an interesting choice. But again, the only problem that I have with that, and it's the Sith Lord problem. As soon as you put a Sith Lord into it, you're starting to play too much. It's almost the same thing that we always talk about when we talk about the Obi-Wan series. When we talk about the Obi-Wan series, we always talk about the fact that how do you put Darth Vader in the Obi-Wan series and not completely nullify or at least seriously damage the lines that were said in A New Hope? And I think that the problem is, if you start to do the Sith Lord thing in this Acolyte series, and you start to bring them around into the High Republic era, it's sort of, and again, I'm not saying, you could get around anything. Let's face it, they're movies, right? In Friday the 13th, if they could find new and creative ways to bring Jason Voorhees back, even though they've really, really killed him a couple of times. And hey, even in universe thing, look at what they've done with Darth Maul. His death was pretty final in The Phantom Menace.
I thought Palpatine's death was pretty final, too.
It's not unheard of. So, you know what? If you want to somehow put something... But here's the thing, though.
That's who the Sith Lord is. That's who the Acolyte is Maul. They found another way to bring him back.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But here's what you could do. Here's what you can do if you really wanted to do all that stuff. You could bring in a Sith Lord, and you can maybe, if you introduce the reasoning within this whole thing, whether it's in the Acolyte or the High Republic, it doesn't really matter which. If you give us the reason. So in other words, it's a context. So that way, when we go and we revisit that line in The Phantom Menace, you're like, oh, well, I know why they felt that way. Because remember, they said the Sith have been extinct for a millennia, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's true.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because Jason said.
Teeing it up for you, man.
Yep. Alley-oop. The Sith weren't exactly extinct. They were in hiding. The Acolyte could be the point of view character that would not be discovered by the Jedi.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's exactly.
Now, what could be, and because Jason just said that, that just spawned a thought for me. I could see them sending someone out to kind of like figure out what the Jedi are doing and kind of like be almost like a spy or a mole. This person wants to be a Sith Lord, but is trying to earn their stripes. And so they're like, all right, you want to be one of us? Go out here and find this stuff for us. Go out and do this stuff. Kind of like the little errand boy.
Dude, it's like the Lost Boys, but with Star Wars.
There you go.
Well, but I guess my only thing is that, and Jason's comment goes into pretty much what I was saying, where just because the Jedi Council during the Phantom Menace said the Sith were extinct for a millennia doesn't mean they were actually extinct. They could have been in hiding, like Jason says, and the Jedi just never knew they were there. I mean, after all, you have Plagueis, you have you have all these fairly recent Sith, and they didn't even know they were there. They didn't know Maul was there. They didn't know any of these guys were there until Maul ended up jumping Qui-Gon
right.
and, basically ambushing him. And then Qui-Gon goes back to the council and is like, oh, hey, man, there's some Sith running around. And they're all like, well, the Sith have been extinct for a millennium. It's like, well, not really. I just ran into one.
Are you sure?
Yeah. So, I mean, it is conceivable then that the Sith could have actually been around before Palpatine and Plagueis and all that. Maybe they were around the whole time.
Yeah.
But they were just hiding.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember because even Maul says, alas, we can reveal ourselves to the Jedi.
Right. I mean, that right there implies that
they were hiding.
They've kind of been doing this a while,
Yeah.
It's not like they just kind of
and that's why
took
Palpatine
that
kind of
be a Sith at home course or whatever. And
his virtual Sith.
yeah, right, Sith for dummies or something. And they're just like, hey, let's practice this. Let's watch a couple of, YouTube videos or whatever, see how this is done. Kind of like when you were criticizing how people would learn martial arts.
Right.
They get on YouTube, they learn a couple of martial arts moves, they go practice on some poor hapless individual, and they think that there's some like black belt grandmaster or whatever. It could be the same kind of deal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a very viable thing where like the Sith, because that's one of the things they've always kind of been in the shadows anyway, and that was kind of Palpatine's whole thing, was he kind of wanted to reveal, because the Sith were always about power, so they always wanted to just come out and just be aggressive and just take what they want. Whereas I can see now, with Palpatine, he took the, like, all right, I'm gonna take the passive approach. I'm gonna kind of hide in plain sight. Like, I'm right here the whole time, but you just never knew, and I'm kind of orchestrating all this stuff that you don't see. It's kind of like the shell games. Like every time you think you found them, you lift the cup up and it's like, nope, not there. And that was the cool thing about Palpatine. So I think that this, and that's why I'm really curious about the Acolyte, because honestly, this is one of those things where, one, it being a female character, two, like, what does that mean for the Sith Lords, like, or the Sith organization itself? Like, what does that really mean for them? And so that's what I'm really, I really can't wait for.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I've been, when you're approaching all this stuff, is that, number one, I'm really excited that they basically, and I guess we can probably even do a show on this at some point, like the theory, but they've been talking about how Asajj Ventress might appear in, I think it's Ahsoka or something.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely some really cool things because they've created a lot of really cool female characters. You know, every time they talk
Definitely.
about female characters, you always think of Leia or Padme or something like that. But
Now you got Rey, you got Asajj, you got
yeah, I mean, when you really go in, and I'm talking about like, because even Rey is kind of obvious. I mean, she's like
Right.
the star of the trilogy. But I mean, when you really start to go into, you know, like Barriss Offee
Andula,
or Shakti or
Shakti. Yep.
you know, or like Asajj Ventress, who I think Asajj Ventress
Yeah,
is
I
one
love
of
that
the
character.
coolest characters.
Yeah, I love that character.
in Star Wars.
Definitely.
I mean, she's amazing. I mean,
even like Bo-Katan. I mean, even though
Bo-Katan. I mean, there's just like so many, you know, Satine. I mean, there's just like so many female characters in Star Wars that are actually really cool.
Yep.
So I just think that, first of all, this whole Acolyte thing is exciting because we could be getting a Dr. Aphra, who is another really cool female character. So we could get something like that. But I'm really curious about the Acolyte because there's just so much promise.
I'm sorry. Ronaldo just made me crack up reading this. So I got to share this. He says, I want to see the Sith doing a Zoom calls because they can't be in public, so they don't reveal themselves to the Jedi. Oh, man.
Yeah, that would be. Well, you know what? Maybe that's where they learned to do that whole like force calling or something, like what they got Rey and Kylo doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But that's how you learn how to choke people over the
You know,
phone. Because
you'd learn to choke them like that, and then the other thing too is like they're all handing off stuff to each other.
I know,
and
it's like a track meet.
I mean, when you're watching this and you're like, how much can you do with this? See, this is an example of stuff that they put in there because they think it's cool, but they don't think that crap through because.
Now we
You know,
got questions.
they're all handing them, you know, here's a lightsaber. Oh, cool. Half a
block away.
right, you know, and you're just like, well, that could have actually solved a lot of problems. You would think that.
Well, not only that, but I mean, just like when he took the beads from her when she was on Pisana, when he felt the water from the island, you know, it's like, okay.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that was my limitation. I mean, yes, it's ridiculous, but even though that's insane, I can go, okay, because those are sort of like esoteric visions and you know, you're getting like pieces of the puzzle or something like, oh, I know you're on water because I'm getting a little spritz of water, you know, that kind of thing. When it's going to full blown, like, here, man, I'm going to hand you something.
Well, when they're like,
You know,
when they're actually having a whole lightsaber duel, she's on the ship, he's on the planet, and they're having a lightsaber duel. Like,
yeah, well,
how?
Exactly. That's my point. I mean, when it's going to that degree,
It's like, okay.
it's like, all right, man. I mean, so, hey, if that's something that you can learn, if you could do like a Sith thing.
Yeah, you got to explain that one. I'm sorry. Like, I need somebody.
That's where they took things, in my opinion, a little bit too far. It's like, all right, I get it, but see, here's the trap, and this is what I talk about all the time. You could start to do things that legitimately serve your story.
Right.
However, with Star Wars, and this is a mistake they make all the time, is you have to serve the greater good. You have to serve the greater story.
Yeah.
You can't, within your story, something may actually work. But then when you put that into context with the rest of it, you know what I mean? It's like now
it's definitely like and I hate the fact that I have to use this because this goes against everything I stand for, but it's kind of like a math problem where, you know, this particular formula works for that particular one, but it's not, you can't use it as a staple for everything else. It just only works for that particular equation, but you can't use it, you know, like you can't say this is a thing that you can use all throughout trigonometry. Just this one problem, but not the whole thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole concept is there's certain mathematical formulas that they'll work up to a certain number, and then after a while they kind of break down. But if you never try to calculate past that, you'll never know that it's actually a limited type of a thing. And that's a really good analogy, tortured though it may have been.
Yes, that's dark side.
Because you have something that's working for your immediate story, but yet in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of stupid.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just call it what it is. I mean, that's just really dumb.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just felt like at that point, I felt like JJ and Ryan were just trying to have like a contest of who could come up with the more extreme powers because, in Ryan's movie, you got Leia floating through space using the Force, and then you got Luke projecting himself across a planet, and then now this, you got, oh yeah, well watch this. He could take beads off her neck from a completely different planet, and oh look, you can feel water droplets, and now look,
and
they
it's
kind of
like, where do you learn that? I mean, if you could if you could do that, then Vader could have just snatched the Death Star plans when they were, you know what I mean? It's like, and granted, you could say, well, okay, these guys just learned. No, they didn't. You're talking about Palpatine and Vader, and then you had Yoda and Mason.
Like, these are two of the most powerful people.
Trust me, if these powers were, they would have been around for a while. You did not just learn this. And granted, you can say Snoke, but if Snoke, he was made by Palpatine. None of that makes any sense to me.
Right.
It's one of those things where if you watch it within the context of the films, it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it's exciting, and it's fun to watch. But then when you think about it,
right,
you're like, well, who even thought of this?
Exactly.
And people wonder why Lucas is just going like, maybe I shouldn't have sold it.
Yep.
Do we have any more chats?
No, not right now.
All right. So pretty much I'm thinking that with the Acolyte, and this is what before we were getting into the chats, I was going to try to steer us towards this. With the Acolyte, they're going to come out with a TV series.
Right.
But now my question is, do you think that they're actually going to try to do like some books or some books or novels, the same thing, or comics or anything like that? Do you think maybe they'll go into a movie? Like, where do you think they're going to go with the Acolyte medium-wise? Because you had the High Republic that's in the books and the comics, right? And now you're going to get The Acolyte, which is a TV series. Now, I love the fact that they're actually trying to bring together television, movies, and comics. They're doing the thing that fans have always wanted them to do. And that is, let's take everything and kind of bring it together so it's one big continuity.
The big thing, to bounce off that point or that question from you, see, what I'm also wondering is, are they going to actually reference the High Republic? Because you almost have to in the Acolyte in a way, just so people, I mean, I won't say you have to because we don't know how High Republic ends, but if you're crossing over or you're introducing this character in the, in the High Republic, like, is it going to be like a Frasier TV show thing? Like it's a spinoff type thing? Like, okay, this character started off in the High Republic, but this is their own story. We might make little subtle references to the High Republic comics or books that the real fans, or not want to say real fans, but like hardcore fans would like catch. Is it going to be like that? Or is there going to be like an explanation of how we got to this point?
Yeah, well, that's a good point actually too, because so like episode 1 comes out of The Acolyte. Okay, is there going to be like an opening crawl that's establishing that this is happening during the era of the High Republic?
Or the High Republic just came to an end and this is what, like, yeah, like how do we...
Yeah, I mean, you don't really know, right? Because first of all, the problem is we don't even know really, when you really stop and think about this, we don't even know where in the whole era that this is even taking place. We don't know, is this more toward the beginning of the High Republic era? Is it more toward the end? Kind of like what you brought up. Is it handing up? Well, I know but the thing is that now Star Wars has changed the rules with all these stupid flashback scenes that they keep putting in now. I mean, that's for sure. We thought that too until you watch Rogue One and you're flashing back to the Clone Wars, or you're watching, the Mandalorian. I mean, there's like a bunch of stuff where they're almost like breaking some of their own rules, which, by the way, I don't necessarily have a problem with them adding things like flashback scenes or something like that. But see, I think what you and I are trying to figure out here, along with everybody watching this video, is where, if it is towards the end, it's kind of like you said, are they going to hand it off like a spin-off kind of a thing where the Frasier thing was a great example, because Frasier started, for anybody who doesn't know, Frasier was a character on the series Cheers. Cheers ends, and what happens is the character of Frasier then moves, and now we follow his exploits after that. And then, of course, people from the series came in and visited through the
Yep.
various seasons. So is the Acolyte, which again, we have to remember that an Acolyte is basically like a Sith student, right? Well, at least a dark side student. Right now, the only time we've ever heard the term Acolyte was in, it's essentially like a Sith version of a Jedi Padawan.
Right. And make sure I get this right. In Rogue One, the little minion that kind of goes with like Lord Vader.
Yeah. The little
Krennic has arrived. And,
yeah.
Like he's an acolyte. Like he's
they're kind of like little Sith disciples, basically.
Yeah, they're Sith disciples essentially.
And so you basically have to wonder, they're using that term very, very purposefully. And so you have to figure out exactly how it's going to tie in time period wise. What's this character doing and who is the character related to? Because you know what would actually be a really cool thing? I'll tell you what I would love to see. It's not going to happen, but I'll tell you what would really be cool is if it's one of these High Republic Padawans or something that decided, to, go the other way and, go a little dark and maybe, all this time. Now, they haven't actually established, and now you guys can all correct me if I'm bouncing all over the place. Sorry about that, guys, but correct me if I'm wrong. Anybody that's read The Light of the Jedi and Into Darkness, because that's like a Star Trek movie, but so if you read the 2 High Republic novels and the comics, like we read the comics, my question becomes, what is the relationship of the dark side and all that further into these things? Because in order for that theory to play out to where one of the Padawans in the High Republic says, you know what, I got to see what this is all about, because in the original trilogy, or I should say in the whole Skywalker saga, you have a thing to where the dark side is definitely taught, this is bad, stay away from it, this is horrible. We're getting shades of that in the High Republic. They definitely talk about the dark side and how it's not good and all this other stuff. But it almost seems to me like in the High Republic era, they're not so much of a completely stay away from it. It's almost like that whole balance thing where it's like, no, learn both, but understand the consequences if you go completely dark. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah. I think that with the High Republic, I think you really kind of, and that's why it's so fascinating, because you have so many different things that are kind of going on. I could see something happen and I think Cavan Scott mentioned this, the twins. I can't remember their names because I'm just getting used to them.
Tarek and
Sarek?
No, that's Star Trek.
Well,
those guys.
Yeah. So the Wonder Twins. So, but those two, like I could see, how that could be exploited by the dark side. I could see so many different things going on, because we saw like how it was driving, even though like one of the twins was experiencing it, like as it was happening, the other one was so connected to their twin, that they were just like basically going insane and screaming and going out of their minds, because of all the pain and torture that they were feeling from their counterpart. So I think there's a lot that we're going to see. And that's why I think this is going to be we're starting to see the rise in the dark side. I think this is where this is going to happen, because from what I'm gathering is like, especially from Cavan's explanation of everything, the High Republic is at a point, it's kind of like at its pinnacle where the Jedi, like they said, are at their peak. But now, much like Snoke said, light rises, darkness has to rise to meet it. And so I think this is at the point where darkness is starting to rise in the galaxy, where now you're starting to have these creatures like the Drengir, who've been around, much like the Sith. He's even said, like, these things didn't just pop up. They've been in hiding. They've been there the whole time. It's just that now they're just starting to wake up.
Well, and that's my thing. It's like, when you see something like that, it's like, who planted this? You know what I mean?
Well,
It's
I think that, no, it said the thing had burrowed itself into the earth, and it was basically like siphoning from below.
Well, and that's the thing. That's what I like. I like the fact that they got this whole thing now to where they're even expanding the dark side powers now.
Right,
and
right.
The origins and all this stuff. And that part's cool. But I do think that we do need a little bit more explanation on how they're using certain elements of the Force because, like you said, one of the things that's been really cool is that they're expanding on each Jedi not only having their own little Force powers in a way, but they also have kind of their own spin, like how they connect to the Force more or less. And that's something that's really exciting about it.
Yeah, definitely. Let me get to some of this.
Some more chats.
More chats, yes. Mother Vanso says, what is the Acolyte?
Yeah, well, again, an Acolyte is pretty much like a Sith disciple or a dark side disciple. It'll be interesting to see when they actually specify that. What's
their
what
definition?
direction is it going to go in? Because, like I said, the only time that we've really ever heard that used is to imply that that's more like a Sith version of a Padawan. It's a Sith apprentice. It's so at one point, but you do bring up a good point, though, that the little Igor-like character that, that Vader had. Right. It's almost like an Acolyte is lower. Like, it's not necessarily an apprentice, per se. It's almost like a follower or disciple or, whatever. Yeah, like a servant. Mm-hmm. So it's really going to be, it's almost like you go Acolyte, then apprentice, then master. Mm-hmm. That seems to be the Sith thing. It's almost like you could even argue that Asajj Ventress was an Acolyte because she hadn't yet reached as an apprentice per se. You could argue she was Dooku's apprentice, but Dooku never really ascribed to her like you're an actual Sith. I mean, when Palpatine was a master, Palpatine basically said, okay, you're my apprentice. You're not going to be Darth whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be it. Dooku, being an apprentice still, really didn't have, I don't know exactly how close they're following these codes, but he really didn't have the power to bestow that kind of a thing. He would have had to defeat Palpatine and then become the master, and now he can name an apprentice. And the idea behind that is, I'm training Asajj Ventress now, so when I take out Palpatine, you'll be my person. Mm-hmm. So and we'll see. That's up for debate. I'm not, it makes a lot of sense to me. But at the same time, if, I won't mention Jasem's name, but, if somebody were to argue with me or debate me on that one, I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not married to that idea because I think we're all figuring this out together. Right. Unless you're, the actual author guys. Right. They know.
Yeah, meanwhile, Cavan Scott sitting at home
he's like, these guys are just like...
You have no idea.
You know what? Let me just chat in real quick, because you guys are way off.
Yeah. Ronaldo says, I read somewhere there's an exclusive power of the Dyad, so only Rey and Kylo can use. Better used than The Last Jedi, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. So the whole, everybody's handing off stuff. Well, see, that's the problem that I have with that explanation. I'll just kind of put this out there. The problem I have with explanations like that, it's not so much, again, that you can't legitimize it. It's the fact that, to me, that kind of sounds like...
a one-trick pony.
Well, it just sounds like something that you're making up to make your story work. I really want to do this and everything else. Because, first of all, you could even go back. It's like, yeah, okay. Ronaldo has a point, right? Okay, maybe it's like a power that's specific to the dyad. But what's a dyad?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like that's never even been, and again, I know that I understand the argument against the whole thing. It's like, well, if you're going to trap yourself into the stuff that's gone before, it'll never move on. I don't have a problem with that. You want to invent a dyad, great. But again, it's a basic storytelling thing. You got to give us some context
Yeah, I mean,
with this thing. You can't just go, it's a diet, and now I'm going to make like every weird power in the world and just point to it, because to me that's irresponsible storytelling.
well, yeah, I mean, it could have been a simple thing where you could have had Luke explain it, or you could have had Palpatine mention it, like while he was training Rey. He's like, well, I feel something with Kylo, but it's different in the Force, and he could say like, oh, he's like, yeah, the reason why you guys feel that is a diet. Well, what's a diet? Well, in the Force, you have blah, blah, blah. Luke can kind of give the explanation. And so then now we all get it. And it's like, okay, cool. So now when they start doing, the track meter, they're just, doing the lost and found thing where they're picking up stuff from everybody. Like, we get it.
Well, but here's the thing. So you can explain it like that, and it does give it context. But the problem is they're even going way beyond some of the explanation stuff too, because
because you had that, because the perfect time to kind of explain that stuff would probably have been, let's see, that was Last Jedi, right? So, but once again, they didn't plan.
Well,
but had they planned, the perfect time would have been to do that would have been when Yoda popped up, when they dealt with the whole tree and the Jedi text thing. That would have been a good time to bring that up.
But here's my example, though. Yes, that's true.
Because it could have been in one of those textbooks or something.
And look, you can ride that one for a long time. Like, Look, there's a stack of books, and JJ was smart enough to at least have her reading those things,
exactly,
like
while
somewhere in the
floating.
Yeah, like in the beginning, like, okay, because the whole idea is, I know what we'll do. We'll just say that this stuff was all in these textbooks, and that is giving in-universe context. I have no problem with that. But what shows this whole lack of planning thing is the fact that, okay, yeah, this dyad, you've got all this stuff that's going on, and I'm really trying to hang on here. I'm trying not to lose it. Then you go to episode 9, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, you being Palpatine's granddaughter, yeah, we knew that. Both Leia and I knew. It's like, okay. Really? That's just really stupid. It actually would have been better in the story if they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you really go back to a lot of those scenes in The Last Jedi, that kind of makes them seem, what would really be hilarious is a little sidebar, now that we're viciously attacking 8 and 9, is to go back into our very complimentary reviews on those movies. So people can point out, well, you didn't have a problem. But you know what it is? It's because they're doing the High Republic correctly, which is really making the sequel trilogy look worse, in my opinion.
Definitely.
The Mandalorian is contributing that to that
massively.
too. It's like now the sequel trilogy's issues, because again, I really did enjoy all 3 movies to varying degrees.
Kind of like what people say, like, a Chrysler 300 looks like a Rolls Royce until a Rolls Royce pulls up.
Yeah.
So when you see it done right, you're like, oh, that's the difference.
Yeah, exactly. That's the difference. That's the difference. But what I'm saying though is that it's exactly, it sticks out more. It's kind of like, it's not so much that the movies are totally terrible. They're not.
Right.
But the problem is that any of the issues that the movies had that we've brought up ad nauseum on this show, the more that they do things correctly, like The Mandalorian, like The High Republic, more than likely all these other series that they're going to do, the more stuff that they're doing correctly, it's going to make the problems, not necessarily make the sequels look bad, but it's going to make the problems that the sequels had and all of its issues and all that stuff just stick out like a sore thumb.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's going to be like, man, could this be any more obvious?
Right.
It's just like, oh. Because honestly, all that stuff that I've been ranting literally about for the last 10 or 15 minutes didn't really bother me that bad. I mean, it did, obviously, but it was sort of like in my subconscious. Like when I was watching the sequel trilogy, even after the fact, I'm not talking about opening night here, but after the fact, it was almost like the things I enjoyed always outweighed the things that I thought were either kind of dumb or I didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole Wayfinder, like that. Just a lot of things about episode 9 where they were really smart. It hits you so quick that you're kind of on this thrill ride for a while. And if you don't think about it too much, it's fantastic.
Right.
And it's a great experience, and it's a fun movie to watch. But, man, there's a lot of coincidences in that movie. I mean, and that was one of the things I know we brought up on our spoiler review.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, okay. But it's cool, though. I mean, at least... So, Rise of Skywalker had problems, but it's a really cool movie. But, yeah, man. I mean, once that whole, like, Palpatine... Oh, yeah, not only did I know, but Leia knew. It's kind of like... Oh, no, she didn't. Come on.
Exactly.
All right, who else is chatting?
Well, I'm gonna go back to when you brought up the whole like, oh, it's the dyad in the Force thing.
Oh, yes.
Jason said it sounds like a wizard did it. Well, just a wizard did it.
Sure. I mean, and you could do that. I mean, that's the beautiful thing, and this is why I think that Star Wars should stick to fantasy, because you could do that. Sticking to the fantasy genre covers up a whole multitude of sins. I mean, you can actually, it's sci-fi. That's where you run into the problems, because
definitely.
sci-fi fans, and you can always tell, because, I work with a guy, you watch our show sometimes, turned into one of my just a wonderful person, great friend. But we'll always talk about Star Wars, and he'll always just like kind of come up and he'll just come up with something about it that's just like,
how did this happen?
Yeah, this is kind of stupid, right? But that's because, and this is true in the whole fandom, right? If you're more of a like a sci-fi fan, and he's kind of like a sci-fi guy.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a sci-fi fan, you look at Star Wars differently than a fantasy fan.
Right.
So if you come from more like your Doctor Who's and your Star Treks and your stuff like that, all the sci-fi stuff, and there's so many of the different franchises, but you come from that, you're going to view Star Wars a little bit differently than if you're a Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, if you're that kind of fan.
Right.
And that's the beauty of it, is that Star Wars has a wide appeal because, especially when Lucas had a control of it.
Well, especially, you got to think about it. It was geared towards kids. Like Star Trek wasn't necessarily geared towards, at least not to my knowledge, it wasn't geared towards like little kids. But, Star Wars, that's kind of what it was intended for.
Well, and that's a good point too, is the fact that
because sci-fi
it was
too,
kind of
too heavy and too much for like a little kid to believe.
Right, it was kind of a moral of the story. It was, again, it was kind of a timeless.
Good triumphs over evil.
Sure, I mean, it's like a fairy tale. I mean, the thing starts out with a long time ago. It might as well say once upon a time.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like, it's not exactly, and that's the thing that's great, is that it's basically, it's a fantasy wrapped in a sci-fi shell.
Yeah.
Is what it is. It has kind of a sci-fi-like environment. And it does tick off a lot of things that are correct on that. But depending on what kind of a fan you are, you're going to view some of the more questionable things. So you're saying the dark side is explored pretty deeply in the latter parts of Into the Dark and A Test of Courage. Oh, yeah. Yeah. A Test of Courage is that young adult novel that... That's about that. I keep forgetting about that there's actually a secondary novel series for the High Republic, and that is this whole young adult thing. I think Test of Courage is the only one that's out right now. Could be wrong, but that makes sense. And that's why I said a while ago that Daryl and I are at a slight disadvantage talking. In fact, I'm really proud of us for being able to talk about this as intelligently as we have been, because there's like two novels that contain a chunk. And I know Ronaldo had basically pointed this out, a month ago or whatever, when Light of the Jedi first came out, is that the comics are kind of fitting somewhere in there. They're basically weaved in there, but they're basically stories that are happening kind of independently. Again, I'm like maybe a chapter or two, and I'm not really that far into Light of the Jedi, but I'm already seeing some of the really cool things about it. So I'm really looking at it. Of course, Claudia Gray wrote Into Darkness or Into the Dark or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, Into Darkness is Star Trek. See, I keep getting it mixed up because, again, Why would you do that? Well, it's not like Star Trek copyrighted the phrase, but
Yeah. Let's see. Jason says, have you read Brandon Sanderson's fantasy books?
no. The thing that's funny about the whole fantasy genre, I've read when I was younger. I read a bunch more of stuff. I haven't really read too many fantasy books lately. One of the fantasy authors that I really got into heavily was Mercedes Lackey. Especially the Bardic Voices series. That was incredible. And because it was like the Lark and the Wren, I think was book 1.
Oh,
And
that's what Kylo, right?
and I remember that series, I was in a bookstore one day, and I used to go to bookstores all the, remember those? I used to go to bookstores all the time when I was younger, like I lived in them. I either lived in record stores or bookstores. And pretty much what I would do is I would just sit in the aisle and I would just start kind of reading stuff, right? So I would be trying to check out all the newest Star Wars and Star Trek, because I was actually a really big Star Trek novel reader too. But I was reading something or whatever, and this guy walks past me, and he's like, hey, you ever heard of Mercedes Lackey? And I'm like, no. And of course, at first this is kind of creeping me out, because I'm like, who's this guy? I mean, you just don't know people's intent, man. And I was still young enough that,
Grooming.
Exactly. And I mean, granted, I was probably like 17, but I probably looked like 13. So, you never know, right? But I was kind of like, no. He's like, well, here, check this out. And he hands me the Lark and the Wren. And I basically was kind of reading. I'm like, all right, it's kind of cool. I wasn't really into the heavy fantasy type books back then. But, man, I'll tell you, I read that book and I was hooked. It was so good. So well written. And they released like 4 or 5 books in the series or something like that. And that kind of turned me onto her. So pretty much, yeah, man. I mean, if there's some fantasy books out there that you think that either I or both of us would enjoy, drop them in the comments section. And while you're there, hit that like button and subscribe button. But yeah, no, seriously, if there's some authors or whatever that you think that we should be checking out, drop them in the comments below. We'd love to know. So anything else in the chats?
Nope, I think.
Besides book recommendations?
That's about it.
Well, I think that ultimately, and again, this is going to come down to one thing and one thing only, and that is, where does the Acolyte take place in the High Republic? What is the Acolyte essentially about? We don't even really have a full-fledged plot yet, so we really have to wait and see what they're going to do. So do you have any final thoughts about, anything about any of this stuff?
Honestly, I'm really excited to, once again, like I said, this watching this interview with Cavan Scott, it's just really refreshing to hear his perspective on Star Wars and where he personally is trying to take this franchise in literary form. I would love to see more interviews with the rest of the writers, honestly, like, Claudia Gray and everyone else, just to kind of round it all out so we can everybody can hear their own vision. And it would be good for the fans to kind of really see, who's at the helm of this stuff. But as it goes into the Acolyte, I'm really excited because that's something I've always wanted to see for the longest time. Is like, okay, we followed the Jedi, we kind of know. I mean, there's always still more to learn about them, but to see things from a Sith perspective, not even necessarily a Sith, but from the dark side.
Yeah, like any kind of a dark side perspective. Exactly.
I think it would be really cool. And to me, I've always said this too. Like, villains are my favorite because they're the most interesting to me. They're the ones who will have the most interesting.
I think
background.
most people say that.
Yeah, because
if you talk to most people really.
Yeah, the villains are the cool ones, honestly, because either you're an anti-hero like Batman or something like that, or Punisher, or you're kind of like the Boy Scout like Superman and Iron Man and stuff, or Captain America, and you usually kind of fall in one of those kind of categories. And so you Luke Skywalker, that type of stuff. But
Yeah.
when you're a villain, you can play the villain role so many different ways. I mean, it's just so many different ways. And, I think they're really interesting, and their stories are way more engaging to me. So
That's why the Joker made as much money as it did.
exactly.
And it's more grounded.
Exactly. It's more grounded in truth, too, So I'm really interested to see what the Acolyte brings. I wonder if they're going to bring it like how, or if it's going to overlap like season 7 of Clone Wars, how it kind of went into episode 3. That's what I was trying to get to. So how that happened,
I know what you mean.
So I'm wondering if it's going to kind of take on that type of thing. So I'm just really just curious to see how this is going to all play out. And the fact that we're actually getting that kind of world on now is going to be on in live action. That's what I'm most excited for. So I can't wait. Yeah,
well, for me, and I have to echo those sentiments too. I mean, when I saw that whole interview with Cavan Scott, man, I mean, I was pumped up.
Yeah,
I was just so inspired, and it just made me so excited for all the right reasons, because you have a person who really cares about Star Wars. You have a person that understands Star Wars, which is something that you would think that with the whole fandom for all these generations, that you would have more filmmakers and more writers and more everybody that would be more in tune. But there's the people that like Star Wars and love it and were fans of it, but they don't get it.
Right.
That's the problem. They don't fully understand it to where they can really convey what Star Wars is all about in a book or on film or whatever the case may be. And I think that that's been what the trilogy, the sequel trilogy, has had its issues, is the fact that you have these people who are fans of it, but don't necessarily understand it the way, say, a Dave Filoni or now a Cavan Scott understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, and Jason brought this up in his chat earlier, is the fact that they understand the Force. And I'm finding out that when you really understand the nature of the Force and how it works and how it should play out, that's kind of the key to understanding the whole Star Wars thing.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I think that that's one of those things where that's where I think the whole future of this franchise lies. And I'm really interested to see, one, how the Acolyte is going to handle the dark side of the Force. Because I think that that's going to be a key too.
Definitely.
So
I'm going to answer this question.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go on to our clear your mind, because remember, I mean, this is why we kind of moved to single topic shows. We want to talk to you guys. We really want to get in, and I don't want to have to move on to different topics if everybody is still talking about stuff, because that's why we're here on a Friday night and a Monday at 8.
Jason says, where can I find the interview? So the interview, you can find that on comicbook.com. And if you just type in Cavan Scott,
I'll put a link in the description.
Okay.
Because I mean that I'll put a link in the description once the live stream wraps and all that stuff. You guys check back, and when you're checking back, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, right? I'll actually put a link to the thing in the description, because I do definitely think most of the time, we'll read these articles, we'll talk about them or whatever, but this is something that I actually think that people should watch.
Yeah, it's actual 30. It's like a 30-minute interview.
Yeah, it's a 30-minute interview. I mean, this thing isn't like just some 5 or 10-minute clip or something. I mean, it's a 30-minute interview. It was done. It was actually comicbook.com took it from like a podcast, I think, or something, or somebody's show. I don't remember if they were the ones that actually did the interview themselves, or if they just kind of embedded it into their site and they're just sort of reporting on it. You can also check StarWarsNewsNet.com, which is a great site for. I'm not even really affiliated with them, but I'll plug them because they're just really on point when it comes to Star Wars news. They referenced it as well, so it's actually making its way around.
Yep.
So we'll definitely put a link in the description. So, all right, we got some questions that we can answer this week.
Yes, sir.
All right. It's time to clear your mind. All right, so we're going to clear our mind. This is a segment where you guys send us questions. And we answer those questions. We pick 2 questions a week that we answer. Who is our first?
Our first question comes from Calvin Derman. His question is, with Yoda being on Dagobah near the dark side cave, how did it not affect him?
Well, I think that, man.
Yeah, that's a good question. See?
It was kind of like all right to just pop off some answer, and then all of a sudden I'm kind of like, wait a minute, not so fast, dude. This one, danger, Will Robinson. I mean, this one actually might be a little bit tough to answer, but
yeah, I mean, I often wonder because one, I get why Yoda was kind of by that cave because it would hide his presence, on Dagobah. So I understand the reason why he kind of chose that particular location to set up camp.
But you have to think about it, though. First of all, there's 2 things you got to look at. And this is just in the only the 2 sentences that you've said so far. All right, the first thing is, the reason why Yoda hid on Dagobah itself was because it was so, teeming with life and stuff like that it would just mask his little force print, if you will. Now, the fact that we don't really know how near he was to that cave, though.
Well, true.
I mean, it could take him a little while to get there. I mean, granted, I'm sure it's not a 3-day journey or anything like that. But I mean, I just think that part of the reason why I don't think it affected him is because you got to remember, this guy's like a grandmaster.
Mm-hmm.
Rey gets near a little dark side thing. All of a sudden, she's having visions of herself, kind of doing that Rey Asajj Ventress little thing going that she had. But Yoda is somebody who is very well versed. He knows how to stay away from it. But I understand what the viewer was trying to say in the sense of the dark side, if you're not careful, because even Yoda had said, look, even the more experienced ones are starting to get a little bit arrogant. They're starting to exhibit some things, some characteristics of the dark side. So how much, and this is a question I'll pose to you actually, because, that's basically what I do on the show.
Yes, you do.
What do you think it would take for Yoda to be tempted by the dark side? Like how much do you think he can withstand?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we kind of saw that, on the Clone Wars episode where he was trying to learn how to become a Force ghost. And that's where, he was tempted. He was, tempted to, and, I think it's his will to do good. It's almost kind of like the Superman thing. It's like if you ever wanted to get Superman in trouble, you also have to put people in danger. And I think, one of the things is attachment, and Yoda's always been good with, letting go and not having too much attachment, but he's attached to the Jedi way though. So it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe that's how you have to tempt him. And it's just, you have to be creative in just what he cares about.
Well, the thing too is that you also have to look at the nature of the cave, right? So does the cave itself, teeming with the dark side, does it actually have the power to kind of like tempt you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it showed, like Luke, I mean, not Luke, like Yoda told Luke, he said, well, only what you take with you. He said, what's in there? Only what you take with you.
Well, obviously Yoda's gone in there.
Yeah.
I mean, how would he know otherwise, right? I mean, so he probably went in there and resisted it.
Yeah. And he probably found something that's like, okay, well, I know what this is. And I think that's one of those things where, yeah, Yoda a lot of times is, just well equipped and he can handle most things. But like we said, like we saw in the Clone Wars episode, he had to fight himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that Yoda's infallible.
Right.
But I just don't know if the cave itself would have enough juice to really turn him around. I mean, Yoda's he's not invincible. He's not completely impervious, but at the same time, he is very strong in the light side, and He understands. See, here's the thing that's different about Yoda, I think. Yoda clearly understands what leads to the dark side. He knows like the little tiny thought patterns, the little tiny actions, all the things that are subtle. Because most of the Jedi, it's no different than people who kind of drift into, a completely dark lifestyle, where a lot of times they don't start out that way. It's incremental, and by the time you look up, you're just kind of like, whoa, what am I into right now, right?
Right.
So essentially, I think what it is that Yoda knows enough to recognize in himself, and in order to turn Yoda to the dark side, which I don't know if you guys have seen this or not, but I know I sent it to you. There was a really cool, like illustration of a dark side Yoda.
Yeah.
It was just so cool, man.
Yeah, it was sweet.
So freaky, but I just think it would take a lot for that to happen.
Yeah, and pretty much Jason and Ronaldo pretty much side with you on that. Jason says, I think Yoda's will was too powerful to fall to the dark side. And Ronaldo says maybe he was too powerful and it didn't affect him. Jason says, I think he would turn to the dark side if it would save the entire Jedi Order in the Clone Wars and bring Dooku back to the light. Anything less than that, I don't think he would turn. And I don't even think that. I think he would probably just have to just accept fate, like accept that's the will of the Force.
Yeah, and I mean, because that scenario probably happened. I mean, he knew Dooku was dark. It wasn't like it was any big mystery.
Well, that's what I said. You can't be too attached to things. You kind of have to.
Right.
You have to be able to let things go. And it's like, well, if this is your destiny, then this is your destiny. But,
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll follow that example, and I will let this question go. Besides, I think that we pretty much answered it anyway, so we can go on to the next one.
All right. So the next question comes from Allison Tarver. The question is, why didn't Luke just go to Crate personally instead of force projecting himself and end up killing himself?
Yeah, I because it's the sequel trilogy and it has, because of all the stupidity.
Yeah, I think it was.
I wonder if it's because, he was determined to. Here's the thing that I don't understand, because Luke, generally speaking, is the type of guy that it's like, okay, once he makes up his mind that he needs to do something or something is right or something is wrong, he tends to go in that direction. It may take him a little while to get there, but he does eventually go in that direction. My biggest issue with this is that, Rey, Chewie, even R2, which, that cheap shot line was so good.
Mm-hmm.
They all kind of get through to him. So he realizes he has to do something.
Right.
The Luke Skywalker that we all know, that Mark Hamill played, and that's the reason why he's kind of he had the reaction that he had, is that, yeah, he should have said, you know what, I've been stupid. I got to get back into this. Let me then go and do it. The fact that he basically projected himself is almost like it's like a weird compromise. You know what I mean? It's almost like, okay, well, here's how I cannot leave.
Here's how I can be there but not be there.
Yeah, like I can stay on Octo, but I could
be in two places at the same time.
Yeah. When the reality is, it's probably like JJ or somebody in the room's like, it would be a really cool force power.
Exactly. That sounds like
it's like, oh yeah, man, where can we put that in? Oh, let's just do this.
Like the climactic thing.
Sure, it does serve a story purpose because it cranked Kylo up to no end.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could say, okay, this is part that's just like sending him over the edge.
Yeah, I think it's also because, his whole point was to be a distraction so Rey and Leia and everybody can get out. That was the whole thing of why he showed up, was because he knew, okay, they were kind of trapped and they needed a way out. But my thing is well, maybe now, Jason says it would take too long for him to get there. And I can understand that, considering that he only has an X-wing. So depending on where Octo is in relationship to Crate, it may take him too long to get there.
I can, yeah, I guess I could see that.
X-wings don't have, well, at least that model didn't have a hyperdrive, I don't believe. Or maybe they did. I think they did have.
They did.
No, they did have
they
small.
did.
Yeah, they have small hyperdrives.
Look, here's the thing, and Jason, I love you, man. I get it, but here's the thing: they couldn't have gotten to Exegol either. It's kind of like the whole Rise of Skywalker movie takes place in like 16 hours, and they're all in this battle, and Lando, it's gonna go like, okay, I'm gonna go and talk to like everybody in the galaxy, and then I'm gonna. We're all going to fly to basically the unknown regions.
Mm-hmm.
It would have taken, they could have gotten around that, but I'm not saying that, let's add another wrong to the right. So you do have a point that it would have taken a while to get there. Even though, do we actually know how far away Octo is from Crate though?
No, we don't.
I'm sure in a map somebody knows. Jason probably knows.
Well, Jason says, if Luke went to Crate in person, he would have to travel by hyperspace instead of the physics breaking force power, known as force projection.
And that is a good explanation. I will say that. See, I can buy that one. Where Luke could be like, okay, I got to do this, and I'll do, and it could serve multiple purposes as well. But it's just kind of like, see, the problem that I have, it isn't so much with that explanation. It's the fact that they pick and choose when they want to do something that makes sense versus something that completely doesn't make sense.
Right.
So if that's the case, and that's the logic behind it that they were actually using, then basically what they're saying is like, okay, well, we can't have Luke go there. It would take too long to get there. But hey, we can have Lando go talk to like half the galaxy.
He could do that like over telecommunications or something. He could send like a mass email or something out to somebody.
He had to, just even to get to where and to try to do that and reach everybody and then have everybody get to Exegol.
To coordinate all that. Yeah.
You can't do it. Not in the amount of time that they had.
Right. Ronaldo actually brings up something I didn't know. Ronaldo says in The Last Jedi, his X-Wing was missing a wing, but we see the same X-Wing with both wings in Episode 9.
Was it?
That's what I said. I don't remember that, but...
Are you sure?
Hey, listen.
I'll have to check that out, man, because I remember one of the things that I loved about The Last Jedi was the fact that, I got chills when I saw that X-Wing.
Yeah, but it was like...
It's like, it's Luke's X-Wing. Yeah, it was just like, oh, he still has the X-Wing. I was all like geeked about it and stuff. I don't remember it missing a wing. Are you talking about like, so like, was it missing the bottom? Because I know it had like two wings.
Well, it had two. Well, maybe like because
like the X. That's what I'm saying. Like the S. They called it S foils or whatever. But like when it opens like this,
yeah.
Was it missing the bottom half or something?
I don't know.
I'll have to check that out, man.
Some rust got in that.
You know what? I haven't watched The Last Jedi in a while, and I got the 4K Blu-ray.
I wonder why. So Jason says you can make the excuse that he could have left earlier, or you could have just not killed him off due to force overdose. But I guess Ryan wanted to be the one to direct Luke's death scene, right? Ronaldo says in the Rise of Skywalker novel, it explains that the X-Wing needed repairs, and that's why Luke couldn't use it. Okay.
Well, because, look, I'll admit that thing was looking pretty rough when he lifted it, when Force Ghost Luke lifted it out of the water.
Right.
But, once again, did Kylo fly it in Rise of Skywalker? Because I know Rey took his TIE fighter. I think he did, man.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he flew the X-Wing.
Well, then there you go. Luke lifted it out of the water or whatever, and Kylo basically flew it. If he could fly it to Exegol, they could have flown that thing to Crate.
Especially in the same day.
Yeah, but again, see, the problem is we're all trying to make too much sense out of this.
Right.
See, because that would be the sensible explanation.
Hyperspace isn't instant as I understand it. Force projection is, says Jason. And then Ronaldo says, so in that same novel, Rey repairs the X-Wing. Of course she does. 'Cause she's every woman.
You know what? Yeah, I read the Rise of Skywalker novel. That's true. That was true. But at least that makes sense, though. I mean, not the, but they did establish that Rey, because look, there's a lot of times where Rey, well, what's this comment?
Jason says, Rise of Skywalker sounds like a massive traffic jam and friendly fire tragedies.
Well, and this is, a lot of times Rey is accused of being a Mary Sue. I get that. But there are certain things, though, where she's accused of that, where I really disagree. Because, for instance, and I'll go with one that you and I talk about all the time. So, when everybody talks about how the fact that she could pick up a lightsaber and she could just start, like, fighting real easily or whatever. It's like, look, she's been on Jakku. She's had to fight for her life. She's really good with the staff. It's a melee weapon. It makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with her fixing the X-Wing. Yeah, I know. It's like, oh, great. Of course she can do that. But it makes sense. She's a scavenger. She knows how to repair stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's had to fend for her life. I mean, they established that in Force Awakens when she was, fixing not the X-Wing, but the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
And Han, was like, oh, yeah, if you just turn this, like, yeah. They both said the same thing at the same time, and that's why.
Exactly. That's been right.
So it's been established that she's...
So I don't necessarily have a problem with her fixing the X-Wing. Actually, at least that makes sense.
Right.
Now, I will say that when did she do this exactly?
My question is, with what tools?
Well, here's another question. And again, forgive me, guys. It's been a minute since I read The Rise of Skywalker. But here's one for you. She left before Luke rose the thing out of the water.
Well, no.
She took Kylo's TIE fighter after the battle and left him.
Right.
And then that's when he heard the whole "Hey kid," and Han and Kylo basically had their exchange.
Right.
Then he decides, you know what? Screw you guys, I'm going home, right? He throws his Kylo lightsaber, and he's about to do whatever he's going to do. And then pretty much, oh, no, wait. That's right. Luke appeared to Rey.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. All right. Never mind. I'm getting the stuff confused. Everybody's probably watching me go, okay, it's going to hit him any minute now. Yeah, right about. There it is. Yeah, I'm okay. Never mind. Carry on.
So, just these last few comments.
Oh, we got to get the comments on there.
Wasn't Rey the one that used the X-Wing and Kylo the TIE fighter? Jason says, I think you're right, Ronaldo. He also says, what doesn't make sense is a Jedi mind trick, lifting several tons of rocks and killing Palpatine with the power of plot Jedi. And then,
I mean,
she used the parts of the destroyed TIE fighter to fix the X-Wing. Oh, how convenient.
Yeah, well, I could go into how they shouldn't even be compatible because they're actually made by different manufacturers and stuff like that. But you know what? I'll let that part go. But
fix the iPhone with the Android stuff.
Right. That's basically what it would be like in a way.
Yep.
Because it was like, if they still... I was like, Sienna... what was the name of the...
He's got contractors.
No, yeah. Well, I knew this. There was like, if they stick to this. Because again, this is like the whole... back when they used to do like, weapons and technology and ships and this and... they would do all these like books, like these encyclopedias. I used to actually know, because I know that TIE stands for Twin Ion Engine.
Yep.
They actually... There's like Sienna something... Fleet or some, there was like two different builders basically of these things, and I do distinctly remember that of the two companies or whatever that built all these ships, It was a different company that built the X-Wing series versus TIE fighters. Now, granted, you can, it's kind of like you could basically have a Ford and a Chevy or whatever, and you can
take a spark plug or something.
Maybe. I mean, the thing is, even that is kind of like specialized, right? But I want to even get back to the whole that insane I am all the Jedi and I am all the Sith thing. Because this is something that you and I brought up. I don't remember if it was the last show or it was, I think it was a Monday show when we were talking about can it continue beyond the Skywalkers. And that is, it would have made infinitely more sense if that thing had ended where instead of the voices, the Jedi just popped up as like Force ghosts and they all like were going to go up against Palpatine. That would have been cool.
Mm-hmm.
But this whole like other thing that they did just made absolutely no sense. So yes, Jason, that was a good point. Anybody else?
On all this basis, I think the protagonists of the 3 trilogies can do things without any explanation. Jason says, I think Rey is a good enough mechanic to make it work. She's a scavenger. She is probably used to patching together incompatible parts that rather than working with state-of-the-art parts.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. Because the one thing that you do have, right? You might have Ford that might have specific parts and Chevy has specific parts, but guess what? Then you have aftermarket parts.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have manufacturers that can make stuff that can fit on both.
All right. Mother Vanessa says, in The Rise of Skywalker, why was...
Because it's like another clear your mind question now.
He the master and Kylo was the last Jedi.
What?
Quite don't understand that question.
Why was he the master and Kylo was the last Jedi? I don't know. Yeah, I don't get that either.
But there we have it.
Well, I think that one of the things that we can look at when we're looking at all this stuff, because again, we were talking about the High Republic and Acolyte a little earlier, and I think we thoroughly, once again, went over all the problems that were with the sequel trilogy. Quite thoroughly, actually. So, I mean, one of the things that I think that you could take away from just all this stuff is the fact that I think that Disney has finally come to the conclusion that, like, look, we've kind of gotten off the track here. And they're now taking enough steps that I'm starting to be, I was a little bit concerned about them renewing Kathleen Kennedy's contract, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. So there is, if you guys look back, we did do a whole show on that. But I think that they're really starting to go in the right direction this time. The Mandalorian was the first thing that we saw that was like, you know what? They're doing it right. And now we're seeing the High Republic, and it's just looking like everything that's coming up, you know what I mean? It's just, I just can't help but think that maybe now Star Wars has the legitimate chance of thriving as a franchise and that they might do a soft reboot, because a lot of times people were talking about the whole reboot thing about the sequel trilogy. And I think I said at one point that what I think is going to happen is maybe a decade and a half goes by. You keep getting all these stories that are being added. Eventually, they can reboot the trilogy as a natural progression of just a decade and a half of stories that they've been telling, and nobody will really think anything of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see how that would work, but yeah, I'll leave. For me, I'm just honestly like, it is what it is. That's my whole thing. It is what it is. We got crappy movies. All right, cool. But what are we doing now? Like, how are we moving forward? And I think with the High Republic and if anything that's going to take place, like, past Rise of Skywalker, just needs to be thought out and good.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not necessarily all that knotted up about the sequel trilogy because, again, you may not have been able to tell by a lot of the comments tonight, but I liked all 3 movies. to varying degrees. I love The Force Awakens. I liked The Last Jedi. And I really liked Rise of Skywalker. It's kind of hard for me to determine which ones I really like the best. But I do think that there's a lot to enjoy in those movies. I think that a lot of the toxic fan base is a little bit too hard on the movies. On the other hand, there are some definite problems. They could have been better. They should have put a lot more planning into it. They should have put more thought into it. They should have respected the franchise, because even if they wanted to redo them, it's okay. You got Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford. You don't have Carrie Fisher at this point. If you were to make a new version of those things and you recast it, it would be weird because you've already made the sequel trilogy with the original characters. I wouldn't have said this back in 2012, but what I almost wish would have happened with hindsight now is if they had recast the characters and then decided like, oh man, we really messed up, and then try to bring back the originals. I mean, you can debate these things all day, but it's kind of like what you said. I mean, we got what we got. That's it. Let's concentrate. Let's move forward. Let's get excited about all these new things. The Thrawn trilogy, Jason, I haven't really had a chance to. I mean, I've discussed it. I don't think you commented on it, but the new Thrawn trilogy of books, which is The Ascendancy and Chaos Rising being the first one, and the next one actually is coming out this next month in April. So maybe like 4 or 5 weeks. Pretty sure it's in April. It's either April or May, but I think it's at the end of April that it's coming out.
It's April.
And the first book was amazing. I mean, the first book was just absolutely incredible. So, really looking forward to that. I think that, I don't know. I think that there's just a really bright future for Star Wars. I just can't shake that feeling.
You have a good feeling about
I
this.
do. I have a good feeling about this. And I have a good feeling about talking to all you guys too. So, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can actually, and hit the notification bell so you know when we're coming up with new shows and everything like that, because we stream live every Monday and Friday at 8 o'clock. Monday, we're going to be talking about Thrawn. We're going to, a couple weeks ago on Monday, we talked about can the franchise move beyond the Skywalkers? And spoiler alert, we said yes. In fact, it probably has to. Well, now this Monday at 8 o'clock, we're going to be chatting with you guys about how we think that Thrawn could actually be the key to that. He might be the key character in this whole moving past the Skywalker thing. He connects everything. So be sure to join us Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. And as always, we'll see you then. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.